Alright, so I wanted to discuss how you could move your assets out of draconian government control. Some governments are involved in actual terrorism on the ground, human shields and stuff, and I'm not going to get into which government, right? And then some governments do financial terrorism. They terrorize their citizens based on financial requirements, right? And this really came up from a conversation that I just had with a client, and he mentioned that, well, my government has all the information about my assets. There's nothing hidden. I'm worried. They have an account of everything, right? So how do you escape? When you talk about escape, what is the legal way? And we are talking about pure legal ways, right? The governments are always going to be right because they're in their own jurisdiction. The moment you exit that jurisdiction, you're outside into a different government, right? And a classic example of this is, let's say, prior to 2018 in Saudi Arabia, if you drove, that government would criminalize if you're a woman. Would be okay if you're a man. Same way, when you talk about the West, there are certain requirements which the government will say they're right, but the citizens may or may not agree. Now, the point over here is, when the government knows about all your assets, is it legal? Is it illegal to move your assets? Now, there are two ways. One is the illegal money laundering way. We absolutely want to stay away from anything money laundering. It'll land you in jail. We're talking about pure legal strategies over here, and my channel is all about legal ways, legal means, using the right attorneys, right? So this is not legal advice, but this is strategy, this is educational information, this is analysis and all that kind of stuff. Eventually that attorney in that jurisdiction would do the filing and verify everything before you proceed. Okay, now once the government has the full account, all the information about your assets, they're in a certain form. Let's say it's a real estate asset, it's a bank account, it's a certain dollar amount. They know everything, right? They want to know everything. Maybe it's through some sort of filings they would know, or they have other means of locating your assets and having some sort of control over your assets, and they have capital control restrictions. Now, when you move these assets legally, right, you want to move it into instruments which are giving you something in return. Either you're doing an investment which is giving you yields, right, or these investments are giving you protections. Ideally you want both. You want capital appreciation when you're diversifying your assets abroad, that should get you returns on your investment, and secondly, it should also get you a residency permit. At least if it is a temporary, then it should lead to permanent, and once you are on the permanent, it should lead to citizenship. The bang for the buck is a flexible residency which leads to citizenship, or something that gets you the citizenship with least amount of time on the ground. Now, obviously the lesser residency is only possible with certain countries with weaker passports. The moment you're talking about EU, any Western country, then they're all going to expect heavy amount of residency, and the reason for that is, again, getting into the tax net. So they have more control, so you're moving from one controlling jurisdiction to the other. That's what you don't want. You want something that is the opposite, which is less residency preferably and less government control. Now, when you're moving an asset for this purposes, right, legal advantages as well as commercial advantages, you're changing the form of this asset. So you're taking out from your government control, you're putting into a different jurisdiction, you're changing your tax residency. Now, when you're changing your tax base, this has to be done legally, especially if you're from a Western country. There's something called as exit taxation that could come into play. You got to exit your system. Once you're formally and legally and correctly exited your Western tax system, you're then entering a new tax jurisdiction. The new tax jurisdiction or the new tax system that you're entering in should be favorable. It should not be the same as what you're coming from. So once you've exited it, you're done with that. There's certain years, like maybe a year or 2 years, that you would have to keep an eye on what you're doing with your home country government. But once you're completely exited that, you're in this new system. This is the starting point. Here you got to be smart, and then you're splitting your investments into multiple different instruments. Let's say if you're doing a property-based residency that leads to citizenship, then you're talking about multiple properties. But if you have some flexibility, let's say you're doing a Costa Rica where you're trying to be flexible with your asset diversification within a business to maintain your residency permits, then you're conveniently creating all these instruments which are within that favorable jurisdiction, which may not care about the inventory of your assets. They're only concerned with your territorial tax income in certain cases. If you look at places like Paraguay, it's a territorial tax based system. So if you're using that for residency purposes, then they're only concerned with your income in the country. They're not really concerned about the assets that you hold within that jurisdiction, let alone the assets that you own outside. So when you're smart about this, now you're in this new situation where you're not only getting financial benefits, capital appreciation, you're not only reducing your taxes, you're reducing your jurisdictions to a territorial tax-based system. You're taking those assets out of your home country, government control, visibility. Legally, you're removing the visibility, and now you're changing this into more private assets that you're aware of. And you have done all of this legally, correctly, clearly, following all the laws. So it's very important to be within the framework. Being in the framework is the difference between, let's say, committing a crime like, say, something like money laundering, which is an absolute no-no. Be careful. A lot of countries have set their rules to gotcha, right? So you got to be careful with this, and that is where I think having the right discussion with the right professional helps. And eventually it's all about the filing, which the attorneys can do, tax professionals can do, etc. And this is a lot of what I discuss with my clients. If you are interested in getting started with this strategy, and the strategy that I'm discussing here is legally creating privacy for your assets, safeguarding your assets, structuring them so you get more residencies or citizenships. Smart people watching my channel know exactly what I'm talking about. So that's the thing. I hope you like this video. If you aren't subscribed to my channel, make sure to turn on the bell notification and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new programs that I talk about. And I hope you like this one. Catch you in the next one.